Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Light Sports Ramble. I am Troy Otradovic. As always, I am joined by my co-host, Evan Watallison. And Evan, today we have a special guest. We have Rob Reischel going to join our show here shortly. I know that he is not on the show yet, but we are going to have him talk about the Packers season, recap the season, talk maybe about some things that need to happen in the future. The guy has done a number of books. We'll give him a proper introduction when he calls into the show. But before he calls in, Evan, there has been a lot of news going on in football today, both college football and NFL football. So I'm just going to let you take it away, and let's start with some current events while we wait for Rob to call in.
Well, currently in the NFL, the Washington Redskins just named Jay Gruden their head coach today, so they finally settled on a coach after interviewing pretty much you name it. I was still waiting for my phone call to see if I was going to interview or not. But
they never called you?
Jay Gruden beat me to it. No, I think I was next on the list, but I guess Jay Gruden, wowed them, which is quite surprising to me. I don't like the hire because you look at what he's done in Cincinnati once they made the playoffs as the offensive coordinator. The offense has been god awful in the playoffs. I'm not a huge fan of the signing.
I'll tell you what, I'm not a huge fan of that signing either. And the reason goes to what you're saying. When I look at the progression of Andy Dalton, you have AJ Green, you drafted Bernard. You had some really good talent on that offense. And to me, it was maybe an above-average offense all season, and nothing happened in the playoffs. And the last game of the season against the Ravens, turnovers, playoffs, turnovers. So I know he was a hot commodity throughout the season, saying that his time would come, and it came. And maybe this is a match made in heaven. Daniel Schneider doing something crazy again. We just talked about it this week, about that list growing and growing, and then he makes the quick hire. So, who knows what's going on there? I mean, we just have to wait and see. But I agree with you. I didn't think that was the signing that was going to happen in Washington at all. But with that, what's next on the NFL, bud?
Bobby Petrino is in, you said NFL, right?
Yeah, NFL. Let's stay NFL.
Oh, I'm sorry, NFL. Well, sorry about that. I jumped in the gun there. The Detroit Lions are interviewing with the offensive coordinator for the Chargers today, and Ken Wisenhunt. I don't know why I just drew a blank on the name there for a minute, but he's interviewing for the Detroit Lions job, and I know both of us are in agreement here that if Wisenhunt does end up signing with Detroit, we're not going to be big fans of that signing.
Yeah, that scares me. And I said when we were going over the coaches that they should have that contract ready, and it looks like maybe they listened to the show, Evan. Maybe somebody from Detroit was listening to the Light Sports Ramble and said, hey, that's a good idea. Let's go interview him, get the contract ready so that when they lose, we can just hand it to him and he can be our coach. But I also noticed that his name is on everyone else's list also. So I would imagine, and I think, at least from my perception of Ken Wisenhunt, he is going to do his due diligence and take the interviews to find the right place for him. Because I had told you when we talked about the coaches that I thought he got a bad deal in Arizona. And he might be looking to make sure that he has that stability, and he may not rush into the first team that interviews him. I think he may go through the interview process. But again, just an idiot with an opinion, so I don't know. What is your thought on that? You think he's going to go through all of the interviews? Maybe not all of them, but do you think he's going to go on a few?
No, I don't think he'll go on a few. I think he's going to settle on Detroit. To be honest, if he wants to be a head coach next year, I think it's Detroit. I don't, because you look around the other jobs, you have Cleveland, and he's calling in right now, by the way. But you have Cleveland. I wouldn't want to go there. So no, I wouldn't want that at all.
Yeah, well, I hope he doesn't go to Detroit. I mean, I'm being that Packer fan that does not want Whisenhunt in Detroit because he's going to do a lot there. But I know Rob is on the line. Rob will get to you in just once.
This is Rob right here.
Yep. Good evening, Rob. This is Troy. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Troy. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm joined with Evan. Evan's on the line also, so I'll let Evan give his props to you. We appreciate you coming on.
Well, I appreciate the chance to talk to you guys. How are you guys tonight? Hi, Evan.
Doing great. So I just want to say thank you for joining us and talk a little Packer football and talk about the season that we just had end and, talk about what to look for, come this off season. So, just thank you for joining us, and it's great to have you on.
And so,
well, the pleasure's mine, guys. So fire away with whatever you got.
Well, I got to give you a proper introduction. I got to give Rob the proper introduction. Author of 6 books, and also the most current is Packers Pride that you've co-authored with Leroy Butler, one of my favorite all-time Packers. I love Leroy. And also a writer for Packer Plus. And Rob, you may not know this, but when we tape our show, we upload it to YouTube with a still shot. And so today what I did is I printed off your Amazon page, so all of our viewers on YouTube will be able to see your Amazon page. Hopefully they'll buy the book Packers Pride, and they'll be able to help you out there with that. But it's going to be another great book, I know that. So, but with that said, I know Evan has some questions. I'll let you take it away, Evan.
So, looking at the Packers season that we just had, and you had Mike McCarthy yesterday in his press conference was saying how he thought this is going to be probably the best offense he's ever had. What do you make of those comments from McCarthy?
Boy, it was going to be close, Evan. They scored 560, I want to say, in 2011, which was exactly 35 points a game. I think they would have been hard-pressed to get those numbers, but, I mean, you could certainly argue it was going to knock on the door of McCarthy's best offenses. I mean, McCarthy has not had it back ever like Eddie Lacy. I mean, you remember Amon Green in the early 2000s, but he was Mike Sherman's back, and I know he had 1 year with McCarthy in 05, but Mike McCarthy has never had a running back like Eddie Lacy, and on top of it, Starks earned himself some money for this upcoming free agency, by having such a terrific season, his best season really in Green Bay, I would argue. And then on top of it, the passing weapons that they had, even without Jermichael Finley, I think they could have scored in the low 30s per game, Evan. Get into 35 is a pretty tricky number, but it was going to be one of McCarthy's 2 best offenses. I do agree with that.
Well, I know, Rob, that...
I was excited to... Go ahead, Troy.
Well, I was going to say, statistically, yardage, what I was reading, it was the second most yards in Packer history, second most offensive yards put up. And so they were moving the ball. The one thing that Evan and I have talked about, and I'd like to really get your input on this, Rob, because Evan and I, every Packer recap, we were on the Packers about red zone efficiency. So if you could touch on, you covering the Packers, what did you see was the issue in the red zone this year? I mean, we have such a great offense, but it just seemed like when we got into the red zone, there was confusion, lack of execution, and we just couldn't put 7 points on the board consistently. What do you contribute to that?
Well, Troy, I think you're dead on. First of all, with your assessment, I think they finished 25th, maybe 26th it was, in red zone efficiency. And, if you want to make a case for Jermichael Finley to come back in a Packer uniform, that's probably his biggest calling card and attribute is I think they lacked that athletic 6'5" guy down near the goal line that could get separation. I agree with you with some of the play calling. Even go to that 49er game, from the other night in the wild card round when they get the first and goal at the 9. late in the game down a field goal and they run Cobb. That was a questionable call. I go back to that game that they tied Minnesota in, and they ended up getting down deep in the red zone and didn't hammer Lacey in that game, and it ended up a 26-all tie. I don't think they used Lacey well enough, guys, and not having Finley was a big problem, but it still doesn't explain why guys like Nelson and Jones, who are, in Nelson's case, he's a bigger wideout, and in Jones, he's certainly extremely physical, why they didn't get more red zone opportunities and succeed more in the red zone. You can understand a guy like Randall Cobb not being a dynamic player inside the red zone, because when the field gets smaller, your little Smurf receivers struggle down near the goal line. Donald Driver never did a whole lot inside the red zone, for example. But Green Bay's got some size with those other wideouts, and I really don't have a great answer why they didn't achieve more in the red zone, because they do have some parts, and Lacey certainly should have been that back that you'd hammer from inside the 10. I do think if they did bring Finley back, guys, and I put it this way, I don't think they'll bring him back, but one of the biggest reasons to bring him back would be red zone efficiency.
Do you see Corliss ever being that guy, if they bring him back, to step up in the red zone? Because Corliss isn't that small as it is either. So do you ever see him, being that guy to step up with that being further removed from that leg injury?
Guys, I honestly think if Finley leaves, and I do expect him to leave, I think they could go tight end reasonably high in the draft. I'm not sold on Corliss being. Now, again, with what Green Bay has in the passing game, what they have with their other wide receivers, they don't need a Pro Bowl tight end. But I think Corliss is your starter, guys. He's in the bottom third. He's in the bottom quarter, probably, of tight ends in the National Football League. That I think Ted Thompson might hit that position in the draft. So to answer the question, Evan, I really don't think Corliss is a guy that they'll ever rely on greatly down there, and I don't think he'll be a guy maybe that blossoms into even a top 15 type of tight end.
Okay, how much does them taking a tight end depend on? So I know Bostic showed he showed some flashes, and he looks like he could be that kind of I guess athletic guy too. But with that foot injury, did he show enough, you think, to warrant an extended look there?
I'm excited to see him next summer. I talked to him at length a couple days ago. He thinks by about late February, the start of March, he'll be 100% again, where he can do full bore running and cutting and all that kind of stuff. He's at least 4 to 6 weeks away from that, so he should be available for all the off season type stuff that they'll bring back and have these guys do here now. From mid March on, he's shown enough to definitely come back and get another chance and be a big part. They'll give him a chance, guys, to flourish in the summer. The big thing is what is he going to do with it? And, just to tight end in general, guys, if you're ranking Green Bay's needs, tight end is probably 5th, 6th, 7th on the board. I mean, it's not. I mean, they've got to beef up that defense, and they're probably going to need another wide receiver if James Jones leaves and things to that effect. Tight end's not an enormous pressing need if they do bring Corliss back. Corliss and Finley both leave, though, guys. Now you're talking about a team that's probably got to take a tight end in the top 2 rounds.
Yeah,
that would be bad if they both left. Now, you mentioned defense, and let's kind of segue that direction. Now, McCarthy kind of gave the indication yesterday that Capers is going to be back. What are your thoughts with McCarthy being committed to Capers for another season? Is it, personnel with Capers, or is it just the scheme's not working anymore?
No, I think the scheme's fine, guys. I really do. Now, at the end of the day, all Dom can do, and I'll start this out by saying I'm a Dom Capers fan. I think he's a hell of a football coach. I really do. I think he's had success at every place he's been. He didn't get dumber, guys, since 2010. I mean, he lost Nick Collins. He lost Charles Woodson. He lost Cullen Jenkins. This year he lost Clay Matthews. And to be honest, guys, the general manager just didn't get him replacement parts. When you go into playoff games, guys, and you're playing as shorthanded at safety as Dom Capers was, it's when you're playing as shorthanded at outside linebacker and even up front on some levels, I think you've got a general manager, guys, right now that needs to be called to the carpet more than the defensive coordinator. You look at that 2012 draft where Ted Thompson went with 6 straight defensive players to open things up. You know, Nick Perry and Jarrell Worthy, for example, just on top of that draft, have both given them next to nothing in 2 seasons. Dayton Jones, the first-round pick this year, didn't work out. He hasn't got a great deal out of his 2011 class. So really, at the end of the day, I think you've got a general manager that just hasn't done a very good job of restocking the shelves. And because we all know what happens in Green Bay, Ted's not going to go out and play the free agency game. Guys are going to leave. Ted's got to find the answers in the draft. Over the last few years, guys, he just hasn't done that.
I'll tell you what, Rob. It's like you listened into our show yesterday with your assessment there of what Evan and I were talking about. So it's nice to know that when we're looking at somebody like that we had talked about the same thing yesterday, Rob. That Dom Capers, he's the head of it all, and it eventually comes down to what does he have on the field to work with. And so let me ask this. When you look at, and we all know Ted Thompson is going to be the draft, and we would like free agency maybe a little bit. What do you think is the most glaring need on that defense? Because we agree with you. You know, the scheme is a scheme, but he doesn't have the players to put in there. How are they going to go about addressing that? Because they need to really beef up that defense. I mean, it was terrible at times.
You know, guys, when Dom Capers showed up in 2009, one of the first things I asked him is, for his defense to work, where does he need, you know, a dominant player or two? You know, where does he need a Pro Bowl type player? And he said, I need a dominant nose. He goes, I need at least one terrific outside linebacker, and I need a lockdown corner. From there, I can kind of go and fill in the blanks. But if I have Pro Bowl type players at those spots, you know, I can go and win with my defense. And the bottom line, guys, is B.J. Raji just hasn't been the same player since 2010. I mean, we're talking about a guy who doesn't have a sack since 2011. And I think he'll go out into free agency, and the Packers will just wave goodbye at this juncture. They won't counter with a whole lot. I think they won't tag him whatsoever. It would not. I mean, they could use a terrific young nose tackle that can penetrate and disrupt some stuff. I mean, Mike Daniels, guys, in spot duty, you know, had, I want to say 6 or 6.5 sacks. Dayton Jones played 15% of the snaps, had 3.5 or 4 sacks. I really can't understand what has happened to B.J. Raji and why his play has dipped and why they don't even play him anymore, guys, for the most part on passing downs. I would say they need a disruptor up front, even though it might not have been a number one priority when Dom Capers said what he needs to go win championships with. They are absolutely devoid of talent at safety. They've got to get 1, maybe 2 safeties. I mean, I can't imagine they would jettison Morgan Burnett after giving him that big contract, but he did not even play at a starter's level this season. You know, M.D. Jennings, Sean Richardson, these other guys, the Banjos of the world that they're playing, they're lucky to probably, guys, be on rosters. They shouldn't be playing 40, 50, 60 snaps a game, however Dom Capers on a given week decides to divvy those snaps up. They desperately need help at safety. They need a disruptor up front, guys. And I really think they need a lot more speed at inside linebacker. A.J. Hawk was solid enough this year. He doesn't run particularly well. Brad Jones doesn't run all that well, and he's certainly not physical. So, I mean, really, guys, they could go the top 3-4 picks again in the draft on defense, and I don't know how you could argue with it because they need a lot of help on that side of the ball still.
Yeah, and Troy was saying, it sounds like you were listening in yesterday. I was, in regards to the middle linebacker spots, I was pretty much saying the same thing, and I said it Monday as well, is they have, in my opinion, 2 weak side middle linebackers playing in that 3-4 right now in Jones and And Hawk and Jones is, in my opinion, a kind of a below average player as it is. And you look at the San Francisco of the world, their defense. Who do they have in the middle? They have Patrick Willis, somebody that's going to get in there. He can go sideline to sideline, but he's a thumper. And I just don't understand why those are the two guys they had in the middle this year. And for me, I'm kind of intrigued a little bit with Sean Richardson's just athletic ability. Do you see him ever being kind of like a diamond in the rough type player to, like another year in the off season to become, to get more reps there? Do you see him being a, if not a starter, like the, next guy in off the bench?
Yeah, I certainly think that's a possibility, Evan. Again, for him, like a lot of these young guys, it's a critical off season. He's fought that neck injury the last year and a half or whatever, and he wasn't cleared until later on this season. So getting a full off season of work, getting a full summer will be huge for him. But he had some mental lapses this year too, where they fully couldn't trust him. Now, does another year in the system and extra playing time change that potentially next year? It could. We all know he has the physical attributes, to be a pretty solid starter. At least he measures up to what you want back there. But the question is he going to get it on a mental side of things? And I think that's what they really need to find out here. Let's just say, in the next 9 months by the time, we get to next September and cut down day gets here.
Hey, Rob, you had talked about Capers saying you needed a lockdown corner. So give me your assessment on what currently is on that team, and do we have the player that he needs there? Or is this going to be where they need to actually go out and address lockdown corner? And if we have to address it, can it happen in the draft, or will we have to go free agency to address it?
Guys, I think when you put together Green Bay's entire group, he's got an above-average core of corners to work with. 38, Tramon Williams. He turned back the clock a little bit the second half of this season. I thought he played extremely well from the point in time where Rodgers got hurt, through the rest of the season. He started making plays. He took on a greater leadership role. His game, guys, in New York against the Giants was terrific. That might have been the best football game he's played since the 2010 season. So if they can get another year of that out of him, he's a 1A kind of guy then. And I think that's where Shields is too, Troy. He's another 1A kind of guy. They don't have a 30-year-old or a 28-year-old Charles Woodson. They don't have Tramon Williams in 2010 in the postseason, where he was, picking off Matt Ryan twice and things to that effect. They probably don't have a guy quite at that level, but they've got two guys, I think, in Shields and Williams that are both above average. And the wild card then becomes Casey Hayward. Can he come back to his 2012 form, play at a level, where he leads the team in interceptions, take away things out of the slot again? Because if he can do that, now maybe you've got a chance to take Micah Hyde, move him to safety, and maybe that solves some of your issues in the backside if Hyde can go and play safety. So I actually like their group of corners overall. The key is, guys, will Sam Shields re-sign, and will Ted Thompson give him the money to keep him around?
Yeah, that'll be the big.
Actually, talking about the corners, I was actually quite impressed by the corner, guys on the outside, the corners on the outside. I was quite impressed by their play this season. My problem that I saw with the defense in regards to the, passing game was more at the middle linebackers and the safety positions. They don't cover very well. And you brought up Sam Shields, and if Ted Thompson gives him the money, do you believe Sam Shields is a $9 million a year corner in this league?
Yeah, that'll probably be the asking price in the ballpark, won't it, Evan? The thing that worries me about Shields is Sam Shields has kind of had an uphill climb all the way to this point, right? He's always been a hungry guy because he wasn't drafted. He had the big 2010 postseason, and really he played really well throughout 2010. He kind of came in with nickel right away and made his mark, but. And he's been on an uphill climb since then to not only become a starter, but to become a high-level starter. He's probably going to get that money, I guess, from somebody somewhere. the question is, does Sam Shields come back then as hungry as he was these last 4 seasons? And, boy, I hate to ever throw out the words Cledius Hunt to anybody, because everybody in Packerland remembers what a bust he turned out to be after they gave him the money, or Joe Johnson or people like that. But that's always, the concern and the risk, I guess, you run. The good thing with Shields is he's still a young player. They can get a little more out of him. He's still on the upswing. His best years, in theory, should be the next 2 or 3 seasons. So if they gave him that kind of money, guys, I would have a hard time arguing with it. You just kind of cross your fingers, though, and hope for the best that a guy like that, who has had this battle to get to where he is now, doesn't become complacent, because it is human nature for that to happen.
It certainly is, and when we see the big money, you brought up a lot of indigestion there, Rob. A lot of it from those names that you just brought up. Enough. As I look at the clock, Evan, we're running under 5, and I'll ask my last question, and then you can wrap it up, Evan. But, Rob, I'll give you one question, and I appreciate you coming on our show. We appreciate it a lot. If the Packers need to do one thing to maintain their supremacy in the NFC North and advance in the playoffs, what is the one thing they need to do this offseason?
Boy, and I would even take it up a notch, Troy, because winning the NFC North these days isn't good enough when you've got a Hall of Fame quarterback and the kind of offensive weapons he has. I really think if it's just one specific move you're talking about, I would go out and get myself a difference maker for the defense. Now, it's probably going to happen in free agency, because you're not going to find that guy at the 21st pick in all likelihood in the draft. So if you're Ted Thompson, I think you've got to do a move like you did back in, was that 05 or 06 when he brought in Charles Woodson and had to overpay to get him to come to Green Bay. But I think they need a guy like that on the defensive side of the ball. The way Dom Capers plays defense, guys, and he's played it, even in the Super Bowl winning season, when he only gave up 240 points that particular season. You think about it, this year they were up over 400. Is he's okay giving up chunks of yards, but he's got to take the ball away from you. And Green Bay right now does not have the people to take the ball, for the most part, away from opposing offenses. So, Troy, whether that's a safety, whether that's another outside linebacker that can get you 10 sacks and 3 strip sacks, whether that's a nose tackle that's going to have 6 sacks like B.J. Rajay did in 2010, he needs a difference maker for the defense. And that I think is where he's got to go out and do some damage in free agency for the first time in forever.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think you nailed it right on the head with the defensive playmaker. I mean to cut you off there, Troy.
I was just going to say we were ranked 26 in interceptions, only had 11. And we all know Dom Capers, he bases that defense on creating the turnover and flipping the field position, and we just didn't do it this year. So thanks for that assessment, Rob.
Yeah, and,
you bet.
Thanks for joining us today. About minute 45 left in the show before it's just going to cut us off. Now, the book that you just came out with, Leroy Butler, I know you do a bunch of signings, or have done
90
signings.
seconds.
Are there any upcoming signings that the fans should know about?
Yeah, Evan, we did kind of most of our signings and our damage, so to speak, kind of leading into the holidays. We were really busy between about October and December, and I think we're gonna give the people a little bit of a break now, and then maybe come back around Super Bowl time with a lot more of that. I'll just tell people this, Evan, that it's a really fun book for people who
60 seconds.
First of all, really fell in love with the Packers, let's say, in their glory run to the Super Bowl in '96, and their kind of rise back to prominence through the mid-'90s. But because we get a lot of great stories in the book from Leroy Butler. But on top of that, then I went back, Evan, and I talked to about 75 former Packers from all eras and who played for all coaches. Just kind of their favorite times and moments in Green Bay. So I think Packer fans, you want to be entertained and learn some new stuff about their team, this is a good way to do it.
Thank you, and like I said, thanks for joining us. And with that said, we'd love to have you on, in the show in the future if you would like to join us and talk Packers. As you know, I love talking Packer football. And,
10 seconds.
As well, so thanks for joining us.
Guys, the pleasure's mine. Call anytime.
Thank you, Rob. With that said, everyone, we'll see you at the next red light. Enjoy your evening.